start. Hi, Mariana. Thank you so much for your time today. Nice to meet you.
Hello. Thank you for talking to me.
Yes. Well, I read a lot of the things you wrote online. By and large, feel aligned with your philosophy. I would absolutely love to learn more. You do have a book out and you write a lot online. Why don't you tell our audience who you are and we will start from there. I'm sure we'll have a great conversation today.
Okay, so I'm Mariana Alessandri. I am a professor of philosophy in South Texas. So the University of Texas, Rio Grande Valley, right on the border with Mexico. And I've been teaching and working here since 2010, so
Oh,
15
wow.
years.
Mm.
Um, and do you want me to say how I got into this topic? Is that
I will ask you about your book and the top. Well, actually,
okay?
feel free, because I also really quite like having an organic conversation. Usually, we have a plan, and then the plan just go all haywire. Actually, now that we're on it, I'll just quickly tell our audience what I have prepared, and we can treat that as more like a framework, and then we can just go everywhere that as the spirit comes. Well, I want to talk about your book. It's called The Defender of Dark Moods. I don't think you have but Defender of Dark Moods. And that's what I first got into your work. And then since there, I read a lot of stuff you wrote online about existential therapy, Stoicism. So, oh my God, I want to talk to you. So there's that. I do want to talk about the self-help industry and toxic positivity. I want to get your take on Stoicism, especially popular Stoicism these days in the West. Stoicism is from the West, but yes, on anger, I think that's a really valuable topic, and I especially like and align with your take on it. And maybe some bigger issues, because as we both know, right now we're speaking in 2025, February, a lot is happening in the world. And if we have time, maybe something about cultures and therapy, but that can come later. Does that
That
sound like
sounds
a good
good.
plan? Okay.
Yes, yes, yes.
Yes, so whatever it feels relevant. I think I just want to give our audience a bit more about your background, maybe even if you feel comfortable, your personal journey and what inspired you to defend the dark moods.
Yeah, okay. Um, so I have always been, I'm from New York. I think that helps a lot with the setup because we were just raised to complain. We were raised to say what we feel. We're raised to kind of, I didn't know that a lot of the US is very sort of nicey and like presents a different face from what you're actually feeling. And but I've learned that I've lived in a lot of different places in the US and I've increasingly had to like wear, what today people are calling like masks, just like present like I didn't know until I moved to Texas that when it's raining out, you can't say, "Oh God, I can't believe it's raining. It's so annoying." You have to say, "Oh, it's so great. We need it." That kind of thing. Like, and I've it's made me so uncomfortable
I can't
that I
name
wrote, yeah.
I can't name two more contrasting states in the States, New York and Texas. Like
Yeah.
out of all the states, that's I mean, I'm
Yeah,
going
but I also
with the
lived in Virginia,
cliche.
which is super polite. Yeah,
Yeah, I
yeah,
mean, I'm going with the cliche and the stereotypes. It's like, I don't know, New York and Florida. I don't know. It's it's
yeah, yeah.
it's very
It's kind
different.
of the South, right? It feels like it's the South. But anyway, so I wrote an article in 2014 for the New York Times about complaining. And that was the beginning of my attempt to try to write for a public, because I've been trained in writing academically, and writing academically is so unrewarding, unfulfilling because for me, because really nobody reads your work. And you're just citing a lot of literature and you're kind of adding like a 1.5% contribution. And I wanted to do more. So I wrote this article in defense of complaining in 2014 in the Times. And it just got a really good reception. And then I realized, oh, I want to do this more. I want to write more articles. I want to represent the point of view that gets uh, demeaned in our society, right? The point of view from people like myself who kind of live in sadness and anxiety and sometimes despair and anger and grief. So I just wanted to represent people and kind of show like what is valuable about us. Which is a really fine line to walk, because like even when you say defender of dark moods, I can feel that some people could take that the wrong way and be like, oh, there's um two lines you can sort of get into that are both sort of extreme, which is the one I'm thinking of right now is like the five gifts of your depression. I feel like that's like a rut that a lot of self-help can get into, when
Mhm.
it's like, oh no, they're not bad, they're good, like these emotions are good for us and this is why it's good for you. And I don't want to do that. I want to pull back from that. So defender of dark moods is not to say these moods are good for us, they're healthy for us, they're wonderful, they feel great, and we're just seeing them wrong. Because what that does is that actually like makes us feel worse, like, oh, I'm not appreciating this thing, right? I'm supposed to make lemonade out of all the lemons. And then the other path that I think is wrong is the more dominant path, which is the one I'm writing about in the book Night Vision, which is just that we with our dark moods just get poo-pooed on. Like we get called mentally ill, we get called broken, we get called, there's something wrong with me, I'm a hot mess, I'm breaking down. We just, and it gets inside of us sometimes to make us think that we're broken. And so I wanted to fight against the notion that we're broken. I don't think any human being is broken. I don't think that having anxiety makes you broken. Like, I think that that's a really bad metaphor that we have set up for ourselves. So my journey has been to try to defend myself, defend my anger, see what's good in it, because in philosophy, all my training has been that the emotions are out of control and you have to suppress them and you have to, be disciplined and you have to get a hold on them and you have to count to 10 and all this kind of
When you
constrictive
say
language
training, what training?
of philosophy training.
So your philosophy training touches on emotions and it's all on that side, which is to suppress it. I mean, I know a lot of people think Stoicism does that, or maybe it does in certain interpretation. We can go into that later. But oh, I'm actually quite surprised because maybe this is a very rudimental understanding. Because when you look at a lot of continental philosophy, there's a lot. I'm currently reading, I will always pronounce them wrong. Emil Cioran, Emil, how do you say his name?
Chiron, Chiron.
Cioran. Yeah, yeah. And what's his book called? Despair. And Nietzsche. So we can talk about how these great philosophers define them. But I'm actually quite surprised to hear that your earlier training is all about pushing them aside and suppressing them.
I guess I'm talking about ancient philosophy because that's what I was teaching, around those
Ah,
years,
of
and just really
course.
trying to instill their ideas from Plato to Aristotle to the Stoics and the Epicureans to a certain extent, instill in the students this real sense of self-control, right?
Mm.
That we have to become master over our emotions. But you're right, my other training, I mean, my dissertation is on Kierkegaard and Unamuno, some of the most tender and despairing and like wholehearted people that existed. So I
Oh.
had that conflict within myself. I think that's what it was, is that I would start to feel bad, I would start to feel angry, and then I would go to the Stoics and they would make me feel worse. So then my book is really about, each chapter has, like most of the chapters have, the kind of source of our education in the emotions, which is ancient, and our feelings that we should be getting over it and we should do away with it and they're no good for us, etc. But then there also is like an existential philosopher in each chapter trying to say what is valuable about either the mood or about ourselves. And that's my bigger intent is less to defend the dark moods than to defend the people who live with dark moods. I want to defend us because we have a lot to offer the world, but we're made to feel like less than. We're made to feel broken. We're made to feel like we don't have as much to contribute. And I think we have so much depth to us that I want to show it to the world. And so I'm using more contemporary philosophers like what you're probably studying, to show the value of both the mood, but more so of ourselves.
Beautifully said. Yeah. I think you've answered so many of my questions already. Why do you think this message is particularly urgent in our time today? If it is, maybe it always is.
Because what I was seeing, I mean, this was so okay. So I wrote that article 2014. I started thinking about a book. Um, in that time, I shopped around a book proposal, but Obama was president of the US.
Mm.
COVID-19 hadn't happened yet. So everyone rejected the proposal. Nobody needed a book
Oh,
on
that
why
is
it's
so
okay to get
interesting.
angry. Yes. Everyone was like, no, we're full of hope. What do you mean? It's the promise. It's the Walmart happy face sign. It's everything was positive and hopeful and cheery and look on the bright side and all of the things that I'm calling, or I mean, that is called toxic positivity, but that I'm calling the light metaphor. Everything that's sunny, everything, bring your own sunshine, good vibes only, choose happiness, right? All of these things that are pressure on us to
Mm,
be sunny when some of us are not dispositionally sunny, and it made
yeah.
us feel like something is wrong with us. So I
I'm not
think it was
dispositionally sunny.
right. I mean, that's why you have this podcast. This is an amazing podcast for people who the world is like shunning and saying you're doing it wrong. And I want to come in and say, no, we are not doing it wrong. And in fact, some of them are doing it wrong because they're kind of, I think the people who are super deep into this, which is a lot of the self-help authors, are kind of pushing us into a stance that maybe they don't naturally take and that we don't naturally take, but that is ultimately poisonous for us.
Mm.
So that's when the book didn't sell, or the proposal. But then I tried again later, slightly modified, and then it sold in 2019. So we're still before the pandemic, but it was already, I mean, Trump had been president, and whichever side you land on, like there was not happiness in the world, right? There was a lot of anger, there was a lot of fighting, there was a lot of confusion, anxiety, depression. And then with COVID, it just went nuts. So I feel like the world is more ready to hear about it now. And there's an urgency about it because the kind of um it hit the fan, right? Like this, oh, I'm supposed to be happy and positive and hopeful and optimistic, but there's a raging pandemic and everyone around me is dying. What do I do? How do I live with that? How do I admit it? So I really enjoyed the time, what the pandemic did to people and their moods, because you could get on a Zoom meeting and everyone was sour, right? It was the first time in my life that I felt normal, that I felt like everyone could just be themselves. And you'd ask, how are you? And you didn't have to say, oh, I'm good, thanks. Everything's great. Can't complain. Like you could say, like, oh no, it's pretty terrible. I'm really worried about my mom. You know, you could like get real really fast. So I was sort of happy to see that shift. Now it is, I think, going a little bit backwards, but I I I try to measure it by what I see at Target. So in the past, when I was writing the book in Target, the store, all the signs were, you know, it'll get better, it'll get brighter, everything's great, bring your own sunshine. But the other day, I was in Target and I saw a mug and it said just vibes. They took it down a notch from the good vibes only. And I was like, that's all I want. I just want a sort of mid world where it's just vibes. You just have whatever vibes you have. You're welcome here if you have good vibes or bad vibes or no vibes or neutral vibes. I just want to like create a world, or like I want to live in a world that has room for all of us and that values all of us and that doesn't make a lot of us feel like garbage.
Mm. Well said. Yeah, it's vivid. Um, what do you think the one emotion, if you were to pick one, which one do you think people defend the hardest against? Anger, grief?
Defend, as in defend its right to exist.
That is another good question, but suppress, like
Oh,
most
suppress.
afraid of, most
Well,
allergic of
it
in our
depends on
culture.
it's gendered, I think. I think for men it tends to be sadness and grief. I think for women it tends to be angry. And these are just the messages we get, right?
Yeah.
Anger is unladylike. Anger makes you a monster. I walked around most of my life thinking I was just a monster. Until I read Audre Lorde and Bell Hooks and Maria Lugones. Like these are people who give me life because their philosophies don't paint me out to be a monster. But I think for men, it's really unfortunate that they've had to suppress a lot of sadness. I have some students in college who just say they don't have feelings, right? They've turned it off so long ago. It was like beat out of them through shame that they're just like, I don't even know where my emotions are.
Mm.
They
Or
can't
they
feel
might
anything.
feel it, but they can't name it. So it just becomes these physical symptoms that seem to come out
Yes.
of nowhere. Or they get
Yes.
suppressed so much that one day it's like a volcanic
Yeah.
eruption.
Yeah.
And bell
And
hooks,
everyone has one. Go ahead.
yeah. Bell hook, everyone has one kryptonite, maybe.
Yeah, I ask my students always to name like what's yours. You're going to identify with one. In the book, I deal with 5 dark moods, which is anger, sadness, grief, depression, and anxiety. And at the beginning of class, I say, okay, which is yours, right? Because then you're going to be the expert on that. You're going to be able to show us what that mood is like. What does that feel like? How has it been received? Or what is the one mood you were not allowed to express as a child, right? People get very early memories. The first time I cried to my mom, or the first time I got angry, like people can remember, oh, that's where it comes from. That's why I say I like to cry in private, is because people shamed me when I tried to bring it into the public sphere.
Yes. I was also thinking about more nuanced ones that people don't talk about, such as envy. And people also seem to think that you can only have one feeling towards a person. You can only love them. I can only love my child. I can never resent them. I can never be envious of them. I can never have moments where I'm angry with them because I love them. But
Amy, this is the best point of all. The best point is that we are complex.
mm,
Like
exactly.
we're so quick to be like, it's this or that. I'm angry or I'm happy. And I love like what Susan Cain did with bittersweet. I feel like we don't give each other enough credit for having multiple emotions. Oh, if you're grieving, why are you laughing? Like, I think if we could develop a healthier vocabulary, meaning a more full vocabulary of who we are and how we feel, without any of those barriers on like,
Mm,
this is not the right emotion, this is not the appropriate emotion, you shouldn't be feeling that. We have to stop describing each other as just one way. Like we have so many things, sometimes indistinguishable all at once. And I think the more we can lean on that and the more we can understand that we are complex, but so is everybody around us. Even if they're being mean, they might also have this history and they might also love you. And they, like it's so complex and that would go so far if we could get away from the binaries. And I think that social media doesn't help with this, right? It's
yeah.
pretty one at a time, and this is also from ancient philosophy. The Epicureans thought that you are kind of either happy or sad. Like they didn't have much room for the middle ground. So we've gotten our education, even if we don't know it, from ancient philosophy that says like, oh, you want to maximize pleasure and minimize pain. And I think that pleasure and pain don't work that way. I think you can have pleasure and pain all together. And the more we can recognize that in ourselves and in other people, the more we're going to give credit to each other for having lots
Yeah.
of things. So even people with dark moods also have a lot of joy and laughter and positivity, but not because we're forced to do it, not because
Mm.
it is wrong that we are the way we are.
So many thoughts have come up as you speak. I'm present to what you're saying, but at the same time, a lot of like thoughts just jump up. I want to talk about bell hooks because you mentioned the work, and I love to have a critique on toxic masculinity. Um, that's one of the writers who really wrote extensively on it. And then something else you said. Let's park whatever I've forgotten. It may come back. Um, yes, and that we're complex. And yeah, let's go with one thought for now. Um, I remember, yes. And I was gonna ask, why do you think we have become the way we are? And I love that you're critiquing ancient philosophies, because even amongst philosophy students, and these days where they're having a resurgence, they are usually praised. Again, it's not one thing or other, it's not like they're good or bad, but I do think people do have a tendency to, when you admire a school of thinking, start to subscribe to almost everything it says. Um, so yeah, take it anywhere. We can talk about toxic masculinity, bell hooks, or the roots of how our culture become the way that it is. We know it's institutionalized. We know a lot of this is cultural conditioning, but where was the root? Was it ancient philosophy? Was it the religions, schools? Is there an
Yeah,
anthropological trajectory to
I
that?
think they all work together. And I
Yeah,
also think they can all be subversive. So just the way that philosophy can also work against that toxic positivity or toxic masculinity, even so can religion. Religion can work against it, even as much as it has in the past reinforced like for me, the light metaphor, the whole enlightenment, Plato's cave is where I start the book, where the prisoner gets out of the cave and sees the light and then understands things, and there's knowledge, and light is safety, and light is um, knowledge and wisdom and everything good. And then darkness got to be everything bad. Darkness is evil and dangerous and sinful, right? Like, so religion also played a part in this. In Christianity, Jesus says, I am the light of the world, right? So there's lots of like light and dark dichotomy there that doesn't help us, right? It doesn't help us when we then talk about dark moods or when we think of ourselves, because I think that we are whole human beings and we are comprised of light and dark. And so if we are, you know, only praising the days that we wake up with, you know, good vibes only or whatever, we don't know what to do with ourselves as soon as things, you know, don't happen that way, right? We're going to blame ourselves because, you know, back to self-help, the self-help authors say, well, I got myself out of anxiety, and so you can too. And so then if I wake up anxious on one day, I'm going to say, oh, I must have failed because I should have been able to do it better. So I think that a lot of different disciplines sort of worked together because it made sense. Like, people love light, but I'm trying to show what is beautiful. I mean, I live in South Texas. Like, it is so bright here all the time. And it is oppressive, right? The light, if we only had to live in like a desert attacked by the sun, we would hate it. And so I'm trying to build some trees or build, I'm trying to grow some trees. I'm trying to show us where the cave is good. Like, we want to go in the cave sometimes for shade. We can go in and out of the cave. It doesn't mean we live in the dark moods forever, that's all, like, I'm not praising them. I'm just saying, like, an inside outside kind of world is the world that I would like, without a kind of judgment on the negativity. Because I think that if the positivity weren't so praised, if it weren't so obviously like, oh, of course you should be an optimist, of course you should be positive, of course you should only have happy thoughts, I don't agree with that, right? So what I want is to sort of like come in and talk about the toxicness, right? Whether we're talking about toxic masculinity or toxic positivity. The point is, when you have too much of it, and when you have it in a certain kind, where it then becomes oppressive, when it then becomes like, if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say it. I mean, people do things to their kids. They say, go to your room if they're angry and come out when you have a happy face. And I just think, wow, like, you are really building up that child to be a person who recognizes that their emotions are not allowed in this world. And then that accounts for so much of the masking that we do. We go around and we kind of don't feel safe with each other to actually say the truth. And so we're missing a lot of connection. We're missing a lot of like actual connection we can have with other human beings that sometimes just happens better when we're sad than when we're happy. And we're trying so hard to be happy that we're missing all of the beauty and depth and different kind of connection that can happen in the dark when we are at our wits' end, or when we're at the bottom, or when we're in the hospital, or when we're on the deathbed.
Thank you for saying all of that. You know, my podcast is called The Intense Mind, and I'm a defender of dark emotions too. Not because the happy ones are not valuable, but I also don't believe in saying positive and negative emotions. I don't think any is positive and negative, but one are more preferred by our cultures usually, and the other ones just don't need defending, so we just leave them alone. Although I do work with a lot of people who've been through trauma, with whom I actually need to defend joy, because people get afraid of joy and playing big as well. But that's a separate topic. But yes, I love that, what you said about the childhood. And what I was going to say is, a lot of my audience do have earlier childhood experience of being more attuned to these things: death, grief, the darkness, what's underneath the surface. They're very perceptive. And whenever they point these things out, they get chastised. They get told by the adults, by, oh my God, like, just don't point out the elephants in the room. I grew up in an Asian culture, and that is very much the case. Things like conflict, disappointment, not allowed. So I love that you said these are not signs of brokenness, but sensitivity, intelligence, and creativity. Do you have an
Can I say one
example?
thing?
Go on.
Yeah, it just made me think of this. I was so pleased the other day. I had this thought, and I don't know if anyone else had it before, but the difference between fragile and sensitive.
Mm.
We tend to make those synonyms,
Synonyms,
right?
yeah.
I'm very fragile, I'm very sensitive. And I think they're not synonyms. I think that I am sensitive, which means I am perceptive. It's so beautiful the way you describe the people who are listening, right? We are perceptive. Gloria Ansaldúa said we are excruciatingly alive to the world. We can feel it, we can see it, what other people are sleeping through, what other people have no idea is going on. We are like highly attuned to things. So we are sensitive, but fragile. I will not say to anybody that I'm fragile, because fragile means, oh, I can break easily, oh, I'm broken. It feeds right into that idea that I'm worse. And I don't think a person can break, because I don't think that that's what we're made of. I think we're human, right? So if we're grieving, it's not that we're broken, it's that we're grieving. If we're sad, it's not that we've broken down, it's that we are experiencing a tremendous pain and we are feeling it.
Mm.
So I really love words. And like, I think it's important to realize the connotations of the words we say about ourselves. And again, it's not our fault. Like, I'm defending us. It's the world that's telling us to use the word fragile. And I think, okay, don't use the word hot mess. Don't use fragile. Don't use anything that actually like goes, we're turning against ourselves. The world is sort of asking us to turn against ourselves. And I see it in my students all the time. They think they're broken. They think I'm perfect, except for I have depression. And so therefore I'm not as good as everybody else. Like, we devalue ourselves. So the words we choose to describe ourselves that are given to us by society, we can reject them and we can say, no, I want to live in this world of sensitive. And I think a lot of beautiful stuff is coming out about
Mm.
the good of sensitive. And like, yes, it's hard, it's hard to sort of be very attuned to painful emotions. And also it doesn't make us worse than everybody else.
Absolutely. Well said. What advice then, or suggestion? I don't like the word advice. Uh, what would you say to someone who have been told that they're too much all their lives, too overwhelming? Or maybe they are not told by others. Maybe they also have, like the man you mentioned earlier, they've come to become very afraid of their dark moods.
Yeah. This is an interesting question, because my book is and isn't self-help. Like, it isn't, in that I'm really trying to do a social critique, right? So instead of the what would you say to the person, I'm like, what would you say to society? What does society need to do?
What would you
So
say to
like, us as
society?
society, right?
Mm.
Like, I think that we as shamers, right? We as the people who actually reinforce these things should try to refrain from cutting off connection when people try to share their dark mood with us, right? Like, I think I'm following Miguel de Unamuno, who says that sharing your pain is a gift to other people. And
Mm.
that is so different from the way we think, we're taught to think, at least in the US, that sharing your pain means you're giving someone a burden.
Mm.
So it's like
That is so
switching the
common.
idea, if we're giving them a burden, we won't give it to them, right? And this is the way my mom thought. It's I don't want you to see me in pain, because then it's going to hurt you. But then if we walk around never seeing each other in pain, we think we're the only ones in pain, and we don't have this kind of universal experience. Like, every single person experiences pain. So if we could tap into that and sort of see each other, he also says, Unamuno also says, we see each other better when our souls are in pain. We can see the people in pain. Otherwise, we're kind of blind. Like, we get a little bit like, um we don't want to see it, kind of like willfully. Like, don't tell me, like, if I'm having a good day, which is so rare, like, don't tell me about your bad day, because then you're going to bring me down. But that's kind of um a block to it. But
Mm.
if we're already sort of in a sad place, you're like, the jig is up, like, we might as well commiserate. Or like, when they say misery loves company, I'm like, so what's wrong with that? Like, why is that a bad thing? Why do we hear that and think, therefore don't do that? What about the communal suffering, or the kind of beauty that you can get and the poignancy that you can get from holding your sort of darkness and someone else's darkness at the same time? Like, we can meet in places that we never knew we could meet before, because we try to show up clean and like, devoid of that, or masking that. So it's both to the individual of just like rethinking, taking our own side, right? Like taking our own side and not allowing the world to give us the words that make us feel bad. And so, for instance, mental illness is a word that's here to stay. And I think it's appropriate. It can get us insurance, especially in the US. It can get us medication, and it can get us all kinds of therapy. And it's really, really helpful. At the same time, I don't want to walk around telling everyone I'm mentally ill. Like that doesn't feel like a compliment to me. That doesn't feel like I have some sensitive attunement to the world. It makes me just feel like, ew, I'm sick. So I think language is important, how we talk about ourselves, and it does involve rejecting what society is trying to put on us. And just entering a different world. That's what I had to do with this book. I'm trying to give us different language, different ways to think about anxiety. I mean, if you've ever thought of anxiety as like emotional intelligence, that's not what I hear in our society. I hear that anxiety makes you crazy. Anxiety is terrible. Anxiety, we have to overcome it. We have to get rid of it. Oh my God, the kids are anxious. Like all we hear about it is, devaluing. But if you read Kierkegaard, he's like, oh my God, like a person without anxiety isn't a person, right? He says the more sophisticated a society, the higher level of anxiety will have. So just
Absolutely.
surrounding yourself with like more beautiful language about the moods that we live in can help us take our own side, and then we're not fighting against ourselves, trying to like get rid of these things that we think have broken us, while, and this is the tricky part, acknowledging their deep pain, right? And I think this is especially important for your listeners because I'm not trying to romanticize the emotions. I'm not trying to say, oh, these are great for you. You should appreciate them. They feel wonderful. Like these emotions, and I think depression being the most dangerous, right, are legitimately just incredibly painful, terrible things. And it doesn't involve you loving the emotion, it involves you loving yourself. This is what I want for us all, is we don't have to love the depression to love ourselves and to not call ourselves broken. We don't have to love the anxiety, although I think anxiety has some benefits that depression doesn't. I think anger has some benefits. Sadness definitely has benefits, and grief, and they're all extremely painful, and you can wish them away. Like Ansaldua, who I talked about before, she was like, yeah, I wish I didn't have depression. Like that's totally compatible with I'm also going to tell a story about myself that doesn't make myself look like garbage, because that's what my students do, right? They equate depression with garbage, and so then they are garbage.
Um,
And I'm like, no, you have depression and you live with depression, but it doesn't make you garbage, right? You can hate it, but it is also, you're going to have to make, like, it's in your life. So how are you going to talk about it so that you don't end up trashing your own self?
mm, mm. Yes. And you're right. You are a philosopher and you're not a self-help book author. And that's what makes your perspective particularly valuable. You mentioned Kierkegaard already. I know a lot of philosophers you quoted talks about the importance and meaning of sitting in the dark. If my audience have a curiosity now and wonder where they should start, would you recommend an author, a philosopher, or even a book? Is there any something that
Hmm.
pops up in your mind?
I think what's hard about that is that philosophers are hard to read. So unless you really love it, it
That's
can be
true.
hard. Some people really love Kierkegaard, Cioran, like you said.
I
Um,
find Nietzsche's work really butchered in the world, badly translated, badly chopped up into one-line quotes that would get misunderstood and thrown everywhere. I
yeah,
guess I'm pointing to the
yeah,
fact that the originals, the primary source is so hard to read and
yeah.
we don't read it in the original language. And through they do that. This is one of my passionate thing that I want to do projects on. I'm huge on Taoism and a lot of Eastern philosophy, and I've studied Buddhism. When they're translated into the Western self-help industry, they're still very valuable in their own way, but they do lose some of the original essence and get misconstrued a lot. But that's me on
Yeah.
my soapbox and my
Yeah,
academic.
no, you're right. I mean, and that's why like what I'm trying to do is translate it for people, right? Like I'm taking what I think of as the best or the most helpful from these thinkers and passages and their lives even, and just showing them. So it's like if you don't want to read the straight primary source, like I'm like the secondary source, right? Like I'm trying to make it make sense for people and in a quicker, more digestible version.
I guess
So
what they should do is they read your work then.
and that's what I'm trying to do, right? Like, because
Yeah,
it is hard. It's hard to go back to the originals, and you're like, where do I even start?
yeah,
I teach a class on it. You'd have to take a class where the teacher has curated what are the readings, and
yes.
then you can get much deeper into it. But not everyone needs to or wants to go deep into the whole book. But you're right. It's too much sound bites kind of in our society on social media. It's like the quote and then the name of and you don't have any idea what the text is. You don't know the context. So that's not that helpful.
But at the same time, I can't get myself through Heidegger's
Yeah.
volume. So, what I guess a suggestion for people interested in it is to read some secondary books like yours who reference certain philosophers, and if it caught their interest enough, they can go from there and go deeper.
Yeah.
Perhaps that's a
I mean,
good
I
way
like
in.
some of for philosophy. And then if you don't care about the philosophy, like Kate Bowler is really good. She's a self-help author on her cancer. And she's got, a lot of books
Put
just
her
on
in Kate
how
Bowler.
Kate Bowler, yeah,
Let me just pop it
Bowler, like just
in.
I mean, she'd be
Ah,
great on your podcast. Like she's funny but she's just showing the toxic quality of everyone. I mean, she had cancer and everyone was saying, you have to fight it, you have to beat it, and all
mm,
these, crazy things. I mean, I love Oliver Berkman, Barbara Ehrenreich.
mhm,
These were like my sort of sources on
mm.
contemporary people doing work that I think is really good because it really honors this side of us and doesn't make us feel worse about it.
Selfish question. What's your thoughts on Alain de Botton?
Um, well, I mean, I think I read him a lot when I was younger, and I just thought what he was doing was really cool. I think the whole empire of it all scares me. Whenever someone wants to like,
The School of
you
Life?
know, yeah, like
Mm.
scale it, and then I get like, I don't want to, I don't, then feels more like a machine or something, but I really
Feels a bit
like
like capitalism
what
again.
yes, it feels like that. So I like the individual books and like I think they're fun and they're super easy to read and you know, but I wouldn't it's like another way of doing something similar, which is just trying to get, I don't know, like maybe evade the hard work or something. So I'm kind of in the middle where it's like I want to make it easier for readers, but I also want to respect sort of the deep
Got
process. I
it.
think it's similar to me of anyone who writes just a whole ton of books. I'm like, I don't know.
Mm,
I don't know how much time you spent on each idea, Like I feel like
mhm.
people who
You
churn out
prefer the
books,
deep and yeah, yeah,
yeah. So
understood. Have you read Byung Chung Han? I can't say his name. The
no,
Burnout Society?
no, is it
South
good?
Korean authors gotten
Okay,
quite popular these days. It's between
cool.
a cultural commentator, sociologist, but philosopher. But he ties a lot of his ideas to the walls in our modern society. Yeah. Anyway, just thought I
Thank
would
you.
bring. Yeah, I quite like reading his work recently, but have my skepticism around it at the same time.
Hmm.
But I think everything is mixed and nuanced.
Yeah, yeah. I'm just interested in your work on anger because I've heard you in
Yes, let's
another
go there.
podcast.
Yes.
Yeah, and you're just like, oh, like I've had trouble with anger. Like it seems to be the pinch point for you. Is that right? That it's kind of a tricky one for you?
Not probably not so much now. Very much in the past
Okay.
because of the whole culture and the way I grew up, and I think I was in a household where there's an allergy for it as well. It's
Yeah.
just very kind of maybe the stereotypical of Asian kids is very not allowed. And I've always been very, well, when I was growing up, I think my innate nature is very direct, and I'm coming back out more and more as being a more direct person. I hardly blow out, but I would say when I don't like something, but even that is really quite difficult. Um, in the context of certain Asian circles, it really raises eyebrows to say, oh, actually, I'm not sure I like that you say that. People really do not know what to do with that. They get really stunted. Whereas
Is it like that
in
you've become westernized?
that is a part of it.
In the US it would be like, oh, you've become American. Like you have a different
You
feel
know,
to
if
you.
I were to pick one place in the States that I feel the most aligned with in terms of culture, it's definitely New York City. Like people find it really, again, I'm going with stereotypes here, although there's probably some truth in it. People find it quite jarring. I think people find me like that sometimes when I'm just being like, oh,
Yeah,
I don't know. I think this coffee's
yeah,
bitter. Like even that
yeah.
is not quite allowed. I remember
I
going
know.
on dates, like just first
Yeah,
dates or something, and I was commenting on the food in a neutral slash not positive manner, but it's no way commenting on the date or the person. It's just
yeah.
factual. But then even
You're
that,
negative, right? That's
I
it.
am a
You're negative.
negative
Yeah,
person. I don't
yeah.
praise
It's
everything.
just
I must be a
right.
bad wife because
Yeah,
I'm criticizing the coffee on the first date.
yeah, yeah. You're supposed to say, "Oh no, it's wonderful." Like it's such a trap.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
I'm not like that anymore. I literally remember the
Mhm.
last time I went on a date, someone said something. I said, I'm really sorry. Maybe this is just my own training in psychology or something. I'm not sure your relationship with your family sounds very healthy to me. Like this is just someone I first met.
Yeah, yeah,
I'm not saying it's the right thing to do. It just
yeah,
came out,
yeah.
probably came
I
out
just love
wrong.
it when someone's like that because then I know where they stand. And I feel
Yeah.
like with people who are super uber polite and always say everything's good, I don't know if they're gonna talk behind my back. I don't know what they're thinking. I can't
Mm.
get a read on them. So I really like honest and direct people, even if they're saying the coffee's bad. It's no reflection on me, even if I pick the coffee shop. Who cares?
I
Like
think,
it
yeah,
it's like
gosh.
grounding in a way. Yeah.
Yeah, I still find myself apologizing for it sometimes because I know how it would be perceived. As for the context just now that I gave, it didn't came out as horribly as I just said it.
Oh
I put a
no.
lot of caveats, like also like, oh, this is because I've learned this from my therapist, I've read this book, and in a very micro personal n equals one perspective, I think this. Like I always have to put 10,000 essay before it before I even speak my
Because
mind.
it's riskier. It's riskier to say the truth
Mm.
than to just go along, right? Oh, this is good, this is good, that's good, that's good. Like but it's bland, right? Like I feel like we do take risks and sometimes we put our foot in our mouth and sometimes it's the wrong audience, right? But I feel like there's something about it that is I don't know, like overall it's more refreshing and overall it's a quality way to be. I'm not even saying we're better than everybody else. That's the point is that I just want the world to recognize us as good as everybody else. We all have our ups and downs. We all have our dark moods, and avoiding them or ignoring them or pretending they're not there doesn't make you superior to everybody else who admits that they're there, who looks at them, who's sensitive to them, who can feel them before everybody else feels them, etc. So like I just want us to respect ourselves and for the world to respect us. And that's a hard thing because it's trying to do kind of two things at once. But what I'm saying is the dark mood that we live in is hard enough, but it gets made worse when other people make us feel bad about it, right? That's the part I want to take off. I can't take you out of your anxiety. I don't know how to, like the painful mood is painful. But I
Mm.
think I can help you figure out why it feels worse, why you feel like you have to hide, why you feel like you can't say things out loud. Like that has to do with society and the way that it's just not accepted. And like you said, it's like a feeling. You kind of no, you intuit like, oh no, that's not going to go over well. I can't say that in this crowd. And like, is there anyone to whom I can say the truth to, right? Like, I just
Mm.
want more of us to tell the truth more often so that we will feel more comfortable and less skittish on first dates or whatever, right? To just say kind of, um, just be yeah and ultimately I think we'll be more neutral like in the end it'll be like because then you'll say oh I love this ice cream this is delicious right oh this coffee wasn't very good but then you'll come out
I
kind of
am
as a
quite
whole
ecstatic
person
when something is
yeah
genuinely good. It goes both ways.
exactly it goes both ways and I think some people are afraid that if I go negative I'll never stop like I've heard this people say if I start crying I'll never stop and I just look at them and I'm like I don't think that's how it works I
Yeah,
don't
it's a
think that's
very
ever
common
happened
fear.
to anybody but it's a fear but I think the kind of idea of sitting in the dark isn't just for ourselves which is important for some people we need to sit in the dark for ourselves because we haven't done that enough and we're so scared of our dark emotions for
Mm.
others of us we need to sit in the dark for the sake of others like there's been a lot of parents who write to me and they're like thank you so much I now understand my kid better because I'm stop trying to just get them in a better mood it's not my job to get them in a better mood I'm not here to cheer up my kid I'm here to sit with them and acknowledge what is not what I'm hoping or I'm not seeing it as a reflection on me and with kids, it's really hard because you do tend to feel like if they're unhappy, you did something wrong.
Mhm.
But it's really just like accompanying other people and allowing and like not judging them and not rushing them through it, all of this kind of thing. Like I feel like at least in the US, and I'm seeing it more in the rest of the world, like uh we would just do so much better if we could like acknowledge the dark moods more than we do.
Yes. Let's talk about anger then.
Yeah.
You reference Maria
Lugonis.
Lugonis.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Redefining anger as good, sorry, right and good in some context. And you also mentioned some feminist ideas. I think people don't understand. Well, very few people understand feminism. It's not just about women. So, but that's something we can talk about. But I do want you to talk about how you think, yeah, the right and good anger, and the having several flavors of anger, the fear anger, explosive anger, the loving anger. Can you speak to that? And what's good anger, for instance, beyond the
Yeah.
cliche?
So, what I love about Lugonis is that she says that sometimes anger can be self-care.
Mm.
And I just love when an author says something and I'm like, what? Like anxiety can be, um, what did Kierkegaard, emotional intelligence, right?
Mm.
Anger can be self-care. And it makes me stop, right? And think and be like, what do you mean? Because I've only ever heard that anger is destructive, and that's from the Stoics who were living in a time where anger was destructive and, cities
Seneca
were
says that
burning.
the most.
Yes, right. He's very afraid, and he has reason to be because he sees people being butchered. I mean, the amount, like people's entrails being taken out and served to their children. The level of violence that he was living in was so extreme that I think his philosophy really worked during his time. Um,
We'll definitely
and
have to
that
talk
anger,
about Stoicism later. Let's
yeah,
come
yeah.
back to anger.
Anger as self-care, it would make no sense in that context, but I think because we're not constantly watching our loved ones being butchered by crazy, monarchs, like we are in a different position. And I think that we would do well to diversify our vocabulary on anger. So like you mentioned some of the angers, and this is even Aristotle did this. He said there's a lot of kinds of anger. Once we say I'm angry, and then we equate angry with bad, then you throw the whole thing away. Then you're like, I shouldn't be angry. Let me go count to 10. Let me forget about it. Oh, I feel better. But as a woman and as a mother, that was happening so much and I couldn't forget about it. And then I said, well, if I'm forgetting about it, then what that means is that I'm just allowing whatever injustice to go on. I'm just letting it happen because I think to be a good girl, I'm supposed to go in my room, count to 10, forget about it, suppress it, breathe, whatever, punch a punching bag, whatever the tools we're given to like manage our anger isn't working because it makes us docile. I actually heard someone recently say, oh, maybe it was on your podcast, that the positive emotions are actually what just let the status quo happen. And the negative emotions are the things that actually change the world. So I think that giving up on anger and calling it all terrible and destructive is actually the recipe for like continuing a sexist world is like tell women that it's ugly when they get angry because then they will self-monitor. They will not allow themselves to get angry and they won't change anything, right? They won't push for any change. So I think first, if we could diversify. So Lugonis goes back to this history where she just gives different words to anger. Like, let's not just say I'm angry. Let's really try to get quite specific. Is this righteous anger? Is this just a crabby mood? Is this resentment? Is this, what kind of anger is it? Because some of them can be quite profitable and important for everyone else to hear about. And then she talks about two different um, she calls them orders. So first order anger is like the one we are most familiar with. You're trying to communicate with someone, you want to tell them how you feel, you want them to listen to you, and you feel like you might get some purchase with that. Like they're maybe a loved one, you feel like you could get through to them, so you're using words and you're trying to state your case, and it's really trying to get them to understand. Now, when that doesn't work, when we feel like the person is not listening anymore and that the world is trying to make me feel crazy, then I go into what she calls second order anger, which is when, and she says it's like putting the way I think about it is like putting bubble wrap around yourself. Like this is the self-care aspect, because you stop trying to communicate with the world and you start just trying to go inside and tell yourself you're not crazy. And so what that looks like though is confusing for people because you're still screaming at them. So second order anger looks like you're communicating because you might be screaming. It's when you're seeing red, right? It's like fury or rage, and you're still screaming at them. So people think like, why don't you calm down and let's talk about this? But you've already discounted them. You've already said they're not listening. But I need to bubble wrap myself so that I don't start to believe that I'm actually crazy, because they will say things like, you're being hysterical, you're being crazy, you need to calm down, etc. So this is where it becomes self-care, because I need to, it's like when a child cries, what I learned when I had a baby is that they're crying to like get rid of the noise around them. So it looks like they're just making noise or that they want something. They don't want anything. They're trying to um, like lower the volume of the noise around them by crying themselves. And so sometimes what we're doing is like cocooning ourselves in our own, screams or anger, so that that force that's going to make us turn on ourselves doesn't get in. So it's just a way to understand. And none of this is a judgment, positive or negative in terms of, or good or bad in terms of whether this anger is good or not. You'd have to inspect it. Every anger, you have to understand where it's coming from, what's it for. This is what Audre Lorde, I think, is really good at, the uses of anger. Because it's not that every anger is going to be now all of a sudden miraculously virtuous, but we're not neutral on the anger. We're very quick to say, well, if I'm angry, that's bad. So what I want is push us to the middle and say, if I'm angry, that's interesting. If I'm angry, something's going on. What is it? Let me investigate it. And so I remember I had a talk where I was talking about um, yoga or counting to 10 or breathing. And I was kind of down on it in a tongue-in-cheek way, like, don't count to 10, don't do yoga. But then my friend who's a yogi, she was like, no, actually, it's good for you because you can sit with it and think about it in a calm way. And I said, okay, as long as you're thinking about it, and then you can bring it up later. The point is, don't try to forget about it. Like when we suppress our anger and just try to make it go away, then that actually has harmful effects on our bodies and on our health and on our relationships. Like that's if, so Lugones talks about training anger and like working with anger, but not as a way of getting rid of it, but as a way of really trying to understand it and give it respect, and then have it come out in a way that is, helpful to you. Because maybe the point is, if you're in second order anger all the time, maybe the point is you have to leave because the person you're with is really just not an audience for you. And so that would give you a signal that you're supposed to leave. You shouldn't really be with someone who's not respecting you. So there's just so much. It's back to the complexity point. There's so many kinds of anger. And if we reduce it to one thing, oh, I'm mad at you, like we're not going to get very far, and we're going to end up feeling bad, especially if we're conditioned as women to feel bad about ourselves when we feel angry. We'll focus more. I was ending up focusing more on how I was a monster than focusing on what's actually wrong. But once I got the monster thing out of the way, then it was like, okay, what's actually wrong? What do I need here? Do I have a willing audience? Am I going to get reception? Am I in first order or second anger? Like once you investigate it, it becomes your friend kind of, and you're like, oh, okay, well, this maybe wasn't appropriate, but then this anger is, and so I'm going to talk about it. Like you can get much further if we allow it the complexity that it actually has.
Thank you. Very clear. And on that, I think she talks about generous anger and loving anger, which is refusing to accept anything less than love in return after you express love. Yeah.
Yeah, and this goes with Audre Lorde, who says that the object of anger is change. It's not hatred. It's not destruction. She says the object of hatred is destruction. So when I think of Lugones's loving anger, it really is, a hard conversation, right? But one in which you have faith in the other person, you have faith in yourself, you have faith that everyone has goodwill here, but it needs to be said because whatever it is, you're being trampled on in some way, right? So it's important to hold a space for that kind of loving anger, that kind of anger that seeks change.
And I think we can apply this to intimate relationships of every kind, and that's your oppressive system.
Yeah, everything. Yeah.
Mm. We talk a lot about women in particular because of the way cultures have. Do you think that is the case? Where am I going with this? Because I think I also work with a lot of men, heterosexual men, who feel that the culture has turned the other way, where they sometimes feel quite victimized, like they can't say or do anything right. What do you think of that critique? Or do you still think women are still the oppressed, by and large, on the side of being oppressed by power dynamics and cultural norms?
I mean, this is a really fascinating and huge topic that's really surfacing right now, especially in the US. And there's a lot of backlash against it. If, whether we're talking about like so-called white fragility or like men's resentment or anger, or like in my classes, the classic term would be like reverse racism, but isn't that just racist against whites, or men are oppressed too? And what I really try to do is try to understand what's going on, because the knee-jerk reaction is, well, you're a fool, you're ignorant, you don't know, but that doesn't help anything. And I think that I'm trying to stay in a more neutral zone to understand, like, what is the complaint? Because if I'm coming from the world of feelings, I don't think any feelings are wrong. So what is your feeling? Are you feeling left out? Are you feeling threatened? Right? Like, I'm not one to have a knee-jerk kind of super politicized reaction against like a white person who cries or a man who is upset. And I understand that there is some ignorance involved, but I also think that that's life. I think we all have certain blind spots. I think we all fail to see certain things. We have not all been trained to understand history and the way that women and trans and non-binary people have been oppressed and are like violently, oppressed. So there's just a lot of grace, I think, for me in this work of just trying to neutralize the platform and be like, I don't think like quote unquote men have it better. Like I feel so badly for boys who are, I see it because I have a 10 and a 12-year-old, right? Who are right now being taught to shut off their crying valve, and in ways that are really harmful and hurtful and public. And it's like, I see that and I really feel for them. So I don't want to get into that kind of, well, you don't have legitimate reason for suffering. Like, this is what it is. This is what I'm going against in the whole book, is being told like you don't have a reason to complain. You don't have it as bad as someone else. Someone once told me, anyone in Auschwitz would love to take your place. I was like, what? Like, it's the weirdest comparison thing. Like, why do we go there? Why do we go to like, you have it worse or I have it worse than you? I think that's from a perceived lack of like a scarcity on compassion and a scarcity on empathy.
Yeah.
And I think once
Like
we
a
recognize
zero-sum
that,
game. Like if you take that,
yes,
someone else lose out.
and you have to justify why you deserve compassion. And I think everybody deserves compassion because everybody has been hurt and everybody has feelings. So I think once we open up the world to the complexity of people, to, understanding that feelings are fine and feelings are, once you can say it, it's manageable. Like, there's so much that we could do if we stop with the premise that only certain people deserve to feel certain ways and everyone else should feel happy. And why are you tired? You slept all night. And why are you hungry? You just ate. Like, we're very policing on, like, why do you feel bad? You have no reason to feel bad. And that's the whole, for me, that's the whole problem with depression, right? That's what my students get told, is you don't have a reason to be depressed. And it's like a misunderstanding of what depression is. But I want to get rid of the world in which you have to justify the feeling. If I wake up and everything's perfect in my life and I feel down, I don't need a reason to feel down. It just is the way that I woke up, and it's okay. Like, it
Yes.
doesn't, the shoulds are really the problem here. So I feel like if, I feel sensitive for men who kind of get treated in certain ways because they're supposed to have it all, or they have all this privilege, or, they shouldn't feel bad, because I see the ways in which they are, barred from emotional life in ways
Mm.
that people who are raised as women often aren't, and also vice versa. Like, it's very individual. And I think that I've gotten a lot of, feedback from men, particularly saying, thank you. Like, this is really like, it's something I have to hide because the world, thinks I'm weak. Like, there's a lot of different kinds of pressure, but also like censor on men, especially around emotions. And so I don't want to add to that. I want to lighten it up. I want to take it away. I want to like, sort of include everybody who has feelings in this project of not turning against ourselves.
Mhm. Yes, I see that a lot in people I see, that somehow someone else will always have it worse, and they always.
Yeah.
But then if you really talk about the underlying principle of it, it just feels ridiculous. Just because there are people starving somewhere
Yeah.
else in the world means you're not allowed to cry. It's not
I know.
logical. It is a trauma
But it's the
reaction, I
most
think.
common. Yeah.
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 Yeah, this internalized oppression, really. I do
It's
remember a
just
couple.
based on scarcity. Yeah.
Mm, mm.
How can my sister wrote to me, she said, how can I be happy when their houses are on fire in California? And I was like, just one has nothing to do with another one, right? Like, I don't know why are like Kierkegaard is definitely against comparison in general. Like comparison, nothing good can come from it, right? Because then it's like I'm either on the losing end and then I should feel bad, or I'm on the winning end and I should feel bad. So
So
it
it's,
just feels like
yeah.
anytime we say like, well, I shouldn't cry because of this, or someone else has it worse, or my sister this, or like it just feels like that's a dead end. That's not going to help us get closer to ourselves. It's only going to alienate us from ourselves.
Mm. That really, the resistance of binary is very much also in my reading of Taoist philosophy. That's why I love it so much in Zhuangzi and Lao Tzu. Basically, it's completely meaningless because it's all context dependent.
Yeah.
Tall or short, beautiful, not.
Yes.
It depends which room you're in and who you're comparing yourself to. So there's no nominal value in that, which makes it rather meaningless. It's also fluid. So if we just drop all of that, the world becomes so much more wider and relaxing.
Yeah. Yeah. I think we all, I mean, so many of us self-punish,
Mm.
self-censure, self-shame. Like it's like, ooh, like and we're not to blame. Like I think the world sort of encourages that from us, but I do think that if we as part of the world could not do it to other people, right, like the little times that we say, oh, cheer up, or oh, don't feel bad, like we do it so well intentioned. Oh, of course you're going to get a job, don't say that. Like every time we say no to another person's feelings, we think maybe we're doing it for their best good, but I just think the answer is yes. Like if someone says, I'm feeling bad, tell me more. Say yes, go with them, not like, no, you shouldn't feel that, or how could you say that? Or, we have a lot of no's for other people because it scares us, it worries us. We don't want them to feel bad, but then we end up making them feel worse. There's so many ways that we could go wrong and that people have gone wrong with us, that it's really about like just trying to match them and find them where they're at and say yes to them and not just no, 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 no.
Yeah, it is that second arrow that we add on the first, as the Buddhists would say. Pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. Because we already feel bad, we already feel anger and sadness, these inevitable feelings that comes in human life, and then we add the second arrow to it, which is to feel bad about feeling bad. It's what's very, said a lot.
Yeah, that's funny you say that because I'm writing a book about that right now.
Are you? Ooh.
Yeah, I'm trying to analyze that parable specifically because I think in the West we've got it wrong. I don't know what the
Have
original
you?
intention was. Yeah, because I guess I just think that
Tell me more. Now I'm
I
super
think
curious.
yeah, I think that's meant to say that we do it to ourselves, that we make ourselves suffer. And I
Yeah.
think that
What
I
has it
think
been interpreted into? Because when I heard it from Jack Confield, it's still accurate.
what I think is that other people hurt us. I think other people make us suffer.
Really? Okay,
Yeah.
I've
So
never heard
that's,
of
I
that
mean,
to me.
well, no, no, that's what I'm saying. I'm trying to reinterpret it that way.
Oh,
Because so
I
what I've heard,
see.
yeah,
I see.
what I've heard
Which
is that,
is
and
also true because it's internalized oppression that has caused it in the first place.
I just think so much of it is not even internalized. I think that like the shame that we get, so take these dark moods that I'm writing about, right? Like, and this was the second book that kept trying to invade in the first book. So then I put it aside. But the second arrow is when someone else, we say that it's like, well, I do it to myself. I shame myself. I make myself feel bad about my feeling bad. But it's because our whole society wants us to feel bad about feeling bad. Our society says, don't cry. Our society says, you're weak,
Yeah,
you're a wuss, like, I don't think we're shooting that second arrow at ourselves. So I
that
think
makes
that
sense now.
this whole idea that pain is inevitable, I think suffering is also societally inevitable right now because other people are shooting arrows at us.
Yeah, yeah.
So I think that we have such little blame to take. This is another like defender. Like I want to defend us because we keep getting blamed for things. We keep getting blamed for our own shame. We get blamed for internalized this and that. We get blamed for, don't think about yourself that way. And I just want to take all the pressure off of us,
Mhm.
even though sometimes it's true that it gets inside me. Like if you live in a toxic world, you're going to breathe in the poison, but then don't tell me that I'm the one who made that poison and why am I doing that to myself?
Yeah,
So
yeah,
in this book, I did touch upon like, anorexia, right? Eating disorders. And it's like, if that person goes in to get treatment and then we say to them, well, why do you tell yourself that self-limiting belief? Why do you have that story about yourself, right? Why do you punish yourself? And it's like, well, look around because we're alive, because we read, because we understand what the world expects of us, right? So instead of blaming the individual and saying, like, you're hurting yourself, you're shooting second arrows at yourself, I would just say, I think the world shot a second arrow at me, So I'm playing with this idea and really trying to like unpack it because I think that it at least in the way it's interpreted in the West, it's really just more of the same of like like if something goes wrong in your life, that's okay. But then if you have any bad feelings about it, that's your fault and you can change.
yeah,
And I did it, so you can too. I can get out of my own cycle of shame.
yeah.
And I just think, well, if we stop the shaming, if we can stop all of the forces that are actually like responsible for why we're breathing all this toxicity, then we would be better off. I don't think that continuing to flagellate ourselves for the shame we feel or the bad feelings we feel is going to get us out of it. I don't think that's going to make us feel better. So
Yeah,
I don't know.
yeah.
I'm not,
No, I get it. I get it. You're trying to creatively reinterpret that tale, which I think is very clever and creative
yeah, just to see
and accurate. Yes.
yeah, and I am interested in the original. I'm interested in how people originally, because I feel like when the West takes things, it kind of mangles them, and even with Stoicism, like you wanted to talk about, like it mangles them and it makes them into like, um, I don't know, it sort of like goes with capitalism or it goes with
Yeah.
consumerism. Like they make it fit into the
Yeah.
model that we already have going on. So somehow I'm gonna end up spending money over my own second arrow, like
That's the yeah, yeah, yeah. I am very passionate on that topic, and I'm going to write something about it academically, but maybe
yeah, yeah,
sometimes
yeah.
bring it out into the public too.
Yes, cool.
Absolutely. But let's go to Stoicism then, since we're both passionate about how the West reinterprets. I'm really studying how the West reinterpret Eastern religions like Taoism, but I think the modern popular Stoicism does that to Stoicism. Um, you can buy merchants these days on Stoicism. You can buy a pin that says Memento Mori and wear it. Saying that, there's one item that I find pretty cool. They have this calendar of how many days you had left in your life, and then you can cross out one
Uh-huh.
to remind you that you're approaching death. That's
Yeah,
quite interesting.
that
I quite
sounds
like that.
existentialist too.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that does,
yeah.
yes. But on Stoicism, yes. What are your take on the popular rate? You've already expressed what you said just now, the popularization of it and how it becomes a Silicon Valley phenomenon. Um,
Yeah.
and what Seneca talks about anger and how it's always something to be managed and overcome. Who do you think are drawn to it? Why is it resurging now? What's the limits of it? Yeah.
So, okay, so there's a lot of caveats. I love Stoicism. I love ancient philosophy, right? This is what I grew up on, and I won't ever completely turn on it. And the reason I love Stoicism in particular is because they're very pessimistic. Or what our world would be pessimistic, they would call it realistic, such as what you just said, right? We have a limited, Seneca says we are dying every day, right? And I told my son that the other day. He said, oh, something about when I die. And like a funny philosophy professor, I've said, oh, baby, we're dying every day, like just
I
kind of
know.
like normalize it that, and it's the same root as existentialism, because then existentialism says, since we're dying, we should live right now, right? And it really is the meditation on death is for the purpose of living well and connecting with all your family members and telling people you love them and not taking life for granted, etc. And I think
And
Stoicism has the
they
same
do that with
root.
Tibetan Buddhism, they observe the corpse. Imagine the rotting.
Yes.
I love that. Like we are just
Yes, I love
flesh
that
and
too.
bones at the end of the day. And Chinese, there's a saying that when you die, you become earth and dust
Yes.
again. Just return to it. If you
Yes.
prefer a lovelier metaphor, Thich Nhat Hanh talks about how the cloud becomes rain, the rain becomes river, and then it gets picks up and become clouds again. That's probably a
Yeah.
separate thing, but yes, we all belong to nature in that way. Where am I going with this? I'm so sorry.
So you were, yeah, but I was going to keep saying about Stoicism. So I think I love Stoicism. I think it has a lot right. And I think particularly it was great in its day, right? I think that what I said about Seneca, watching people cut each other up, with arrows, like with like violent, like means, I think what he needed was some control, right? I think Stoicism is the philosophy for when the physical world is completely out of your control.
Mm.
And I think it's lovely. And I think when I've taught it to students, they love it. Like Stoicism, it has a resurgence for a reason because it makes you feel like there is something you can control. So they say that you can't control the outsides, but you can control the inside. So I try to get my students to completely stop trying to control their circumstances and completely work on their emotions, their patience, their happiness, whatever, like the inside stuff. And so it is very tempting because in a sense, it's easier to let go. Like once you stop battling, what does this person think of me? Well, Seneca's like, you can't control that, right? How is this person going to, that person insulted me. And Seneca's like, no, you can only get insulted if you let it happen. Like there's such a beauty and a simplicity to Stoicism that helps you feel one small in a big world, which is actually a good feeling. It can release you of this kind of pressure we have to be everything and to do everything and to see everything, and which is like kind of rampant in our world. But then also makes you feel like there is something you can control. There's one thing that's within your control, which is yourself. Um, so there's a clarity to it. There's a beauty to it. I don't know that the West, it's not that it's totally gotten it wrong, right? But it takes it up in such a way that it feels much more like a self-help device than like an overall philosophy of nature kind of thing. So one, it's like very limited in its usefulness. Like I think of it primarily as a self-help tool in the West, which it also was, but it also had these other components to it. So it's limited, but I think people are attracted to it right now because they feel out of control. I think the more out of control you feel, the more you want a system where you can at least control your insides.
Mm.
So I understand the resurgence. I understand everybody's love for it, and I love it too. And that's why I kept going back to it. I would read Epictetus every year. Um,
Is he your
but
favorite Stoic?
oh, they all are. I think Marcus, like if I had to just read one Stoic, I'd read Marcus Aurelius every
Mine
year because he's the
too.
most level-headed. Like he's
Compassionate.
not, he's very sweet. He's not down on us. Like Seneca's pretty harsh. Epictetus is like really harsh. So
Yes.
Marcus
Well,
is just a kind of a very he's like a normal person, even though he's the
mm,
emperor of Rome. But I was
exactly.
gonna say that I don't,
One day you
so
said
I
it's a
think, yeah.
philosophy for prison.
Yes, yeah, that's how I feel. Like if you really can't change your circumstances, and I don't even mean this like in a mean way. Like I love Stoicism, but I think it's like extreme. Like it's really defeatist. If you really can't change your outside circumstances, like you are trapped somewhere, I think Stoicism is amazing. But I don't think we live in that world. Like I'm oddly more optimistic than the Stoics are because I actually think we can change our world, and I think we have to work hard at it, and I think we have to but I also believe in philosophy. I believe in the power of ideas to change people and to change people's way of thinking, and that will change their way of behaving toward other people. So I actually think we can change our world. I don't think we can only change ourselves.
Mm.
Like, and in a big way, not in a small way. Like, I still can't change someone's perception of me, right? Like, I still agree with them that like certain things are futile to try, but I don't want to give up on the world. Like, what Seneca was experiencing was totally out of his control. He could not have changed the system that he was living in. But I think that we have more control over that, especially like I have a voice, I can write, I can put things out there. Like, and I've seen people be like, oh, I have changed the way that I treat my kid because of you. And I'm like, oh, wow, that's really important. So I don't want to give up on the ability to change the world, even though it's a very lofty goal. Um, I think for me, the Stoicism is too small because it really just, it's kind of like hunker down. Like when everything's going crazy, you can hunker down and you can still be okay.
Mm.
So I don't blame people for liking Stoicism. Like I'm not against it. I think if your listeners like it, like go for it. It's just for me, the way I describe ancient philosophy for me is it's dangerous because I would go to it in my most vulnerable, same as self-help. I go to it in my most vulnerable moments and it tells me I'm doing it all wrong.
Mm.
That's what they're both in common. And I still go to self-help. I love self-help. But it always tells me, well, this is why you're messed up. This is how you're doing it wrong. This is what you should be doing. And that's when I'm like, oh, see, I knew I was doing it wrong. So it's like a masochistic for me, a masochistic philosophy that like when I go back, I'm like, oh, I shouldn't have done that. And then I go back and they're like, you shouldn't have done that. That was terrible. And I'm like, oh no, I knew it. It's like punishing. So for me, I have to approach ancient philosophy very carefully
Mm.
and recognize when it is making me feel worse about myself, as opposed to the existentialists who I just go and they make me feel totally normal. They make me feel very common. They make me feel like this is the human condition. And everything I'm feeling is exactly human feelings. And so then I just feel, like it doesn't feel as dangerous to approach them because I don't think that they're going to yell at me for what I've done.
Yes, there's so much that I could say to that. That it makes me think about how with bad CBT, not all CBT are bad, but or even philosophical counseling or some form of it, there's a lot about logic. As the whole field of philosophy is turning in that direction also, where there's a huge emphasis on analysis and logic, which is very much, it does very much have an Anglo-Saxon origin, I think. The praise of scientism and rationality, people applying that to counseling and mental health, but then that a lot of the times become challenging how certain things is not logical. But when you actually works with human, like the background that I have, started out as a social worker therapist type, you really realize that's most of the time not what people need, especially in moments of suffering. It's good insight, but it is not often very immediately helpful when you say there's a logical flaw from A to B. Or in cognitive behavioral therapy, they have got all these irrational things listed. And then you as a therapist is supposed to very quickly figure out which one it is. And then you go say, oh, this is called catastrophizing. You're catastrophizing, therefore it's irrational. And since it's irrational, let's change it. But emotionally, you can't actually quite do that.
Yeah, and I think, I have found it. I have found a lot of people who have said it's a dead end for them, CBT, particularly because of that, because of this dichotomy or this kind of this is what you can control, this is what you can't. But also like you're doing it to yourself, right? It's got a lot of self-blame baked into it, which
Mhm.
is if you're having irrational thoughts, then no wonder you're not happy. So therefore get rid of the irrational thoughts. But that doesn't affirm, I think that ACT or DBT like have more
I was going to bring it up.
acceptance.
Yes, they
Yeah,
brought
like
in
I
the
think
acceptance
there's
piece.
yeah, it just has much more of like it is what it is, let it be, don't try to chase it away, don't try to change your narrative. I feel like it's at this point quite old. And it still has a hold on people, but for me it's old. For me it's like like I have I understand that there's merits to like taking apart some of these pieces of the narrative, but I think that so much of it is located so much deeper within us that it's not really just about like I don't know. I know that the stories we tell ourselves are very important too. There's just not a dichotomy, but I think that the more we try to make it look easy, like you just have a logic problem, right? And so you should just fix your logic problem. And in a sense, that goes back to the Stoics. Like if we know better, why don't we do better? If we understand what makes us happy, why don't we just do it? And I think we're fighting against, I mean, not even, we're just tussling with our bodies, our souls, like our emotional lives. Like I think that logic a lot of the times is an excuse. We kind of, I see philosophers who I think are making mistakes in their thinking, and I'm like, wow, like Unamuno said a long time ago that we don't really decide with our brains. We think things with our hearts. And so we're going to justify whatever it is that we naturally gravitate toward. We're going to find reasons and find a logic to justify it, but it's backwards. We think that philosophers tend to think that like, well, you have to believe what's logical, even if you don't love it. And I think that when Unamuno is saying, well, your heart is pulled towards certain things. And this is all the way back to Pascal, who says the heart has reasons that reason doesn't understand.
Yes.
Right. So it's like, what is the driving force for me being an existentialist? It's the body, it's the soul, it's the heart, it's the desire to live and to live well, rather than to be a thinking machine that just gets every logical proposition correct or something.
Yeah.
I think that's much, much more secondary to us. And I think that I don't know if it applies to everyone. I think there are people who are more, super logical, but I don't think that those are people we want to emulate or that we do emulate in life. I think that the sort of person on fire is like what we gravitate toward.
Yes, I align with where you're coming from so much. I was drawn to your work because you're not a pure analytical philosopher, which is where the field is really going right now. I think maybe not where you are, but I think it is where, in places that I've come across, I think it is where it is in England, in the States, maybe better in Europe, certainly in Asia. But what I am drawn to is that your work sits between philosophy and cultural studies. I think you link up to society, and sometimes you quote from literature, which I think is beautiful, and they are so linked. For example, do you think how our language, how the way we describe emotions and mental health and use medicalized term, and that they all ties in with the wider power structure? How do you think the philosophy that you study help us resist or reframe these phrases, the place, how we use language, and yeah, and the
Yeah,
weaponization of
diversifying.
identity
Yeah.
politics, diversifying is the
Yeah,
answer.
I think it's language. I think it really has to do with words. I don't need to get rid of any words, but I want to add more words.
Mm.
I want a plethora of ways we can describe ourselves. Now, I
Mm.
would like to get rid of certain words like I'm broken or like I'm a hot mess or I'm falling apart. Like, I think those words do us no favors. They don't make us feel better about ourselves. They make us feel like garbage. But
Mm.
I think, like I was saying before, mental illness, fine word, good word. Let's also think of more creative words that can describe us, that make us feel good about ourselves,
Yeah.
that don't make us just feel like there's something wrong with us. So I don't, yeah, in general, like I just want to add options for people. I want to add options in terms of language, in terms of ideas, in terms of show examples of people who, like Ansaldúa lived with depression and she never called it depression. She called it the Coatlicue state, right? So it's like, oh, this is a creative way to tell the story of yourself that doesn't involve that word, like, so I just think it has to do with diversifying our sources, diversifying our language, diversifying the way we think about it. Like it's not black and white, or it's not this way or that way, or it's not like it can be a lot of things at once, and then kind of go toward the one that makes you feel best about yourself and go away from the one that makes you feel like you're punishing yourself.
Mm.
So I don't think that's our job. Like it's not self-help because it's not like go do this today. It's like the world needs to diversify. Like I want to put these ideas into the world so that we can have more ideas out there and more ways to describe our dark moods than just the ones we've been given by mostly the medical industry, and CBT has been so popular that has really had like a dominion, right? Like a reign over the way we think about things. And so I just want to add more options, more ways to think about it for people for whom it doesn't work. Because I don't want the person, like CBT works for so many people, but then for the people who it doesn't work, I don't want them to end with, oh, it's because I didn't put in the work.
Mm.
You know, that's too much. So it's like, no, it didn't work for me because I have this other way of thinking, and this
Mm.
other way of thinking makes me feel better about myself. So I think there's just trying to prescribe something for everyone. And, you know, obviously CBT has the advantage of being the quickest and the gold standard and the most loved by insurance because it's a 6 week whatever, you know, like it's got some nasty underbelly elements to it that go with capitalism. But I think that just diversifying or just adding more will help us have more choices than saying like everyone has to fit in this box and everyone should be happy all the time and everyone should see the light at the end of the tunnel and everyone should make lemonade out of lemons, you know. I feel
This
like
is
just respecting us as individuals, you know.
mm, oh, this is absolutely wonderful. The timing of it is wonderful because my last guest was Dr. David Burns. Mm.
Mm,
Who was
nice.
like one of the biggest pioneers of CBT, who wrote Feeling Good and all that. And I want people to understand, I love the language of pluralism and conversations. I probably have a bit of my personal preference, but I'm not taking sides here because everything has their merits and they're like Zhuangzi said, nothing is good or bad. So I love that. My last episode podcast, we very much praised the speed of it. He's combining it with AI and doing some really speedy, interesting thing with it. And then now we have you, and here we are talking about existentialism and how that helps us sit in the darkness. It's not always about getting through it in 6 weeks.
Yeah, but I think even in his book, right? Like he's got so much acceptance in there. He's got so much feelings, so much spectrum, so much like in the actual work. And then it gets sort of taken away and then plugged into a system and then covered by insurance, right? It becomes a different thing. But in the original thing, it so many of the people who sort of started things like even Martin Seligman, who I'm critical of in the book, like there's so much good in there too. It's not all um nefarious. It just gets sort of taken away. Even like we were talking about Stoicism or for you, the sort of Eastern religions in the West, they get
Mm.
taken away and sort of condensed and made into like a line, right? Rather than like a whole full complex philosophy or person.
Yeah, but there is
Yeah.
value in that. I've read The Tao of Pooh. I've read Wayne Dyer's work on Taoism, and it's quite soothing. I quite like them.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. Huh.
Yeah.
I want to be respectful of your time, and we've been speaking for an hour. I just really enjoyed your energy, your passion for the work, your perspective. Love your take on the first arrow, second arrow. Can't wait for that to come out. At first,
Yeah.
I was like, oh my God, you got it wrong. But no, actually,
Yeah.
your take
Yeah.
on it was great.
We'll
And
see if
it's,
I can pull it off. Yeah.
I think I immediately click with that. I think, especially for people who studied something around cultural studies and sociology, they immediately understood what you meant by, no, actually, other people do that to you. And that is so true. Um, and that's something, yeah, I'm gonna go on with another tangent about psychoanalysis, but we don't have to. Is there
Mhm.
anything you would leave like a message for us? There's so much I want to talk to you about, really. This whole sitting with darkness, sitting with the ideas that our society banishes, death, grief, all that. But if you were to give our audience a gift, a nugget, or
Yeah.
just a few lines, um,
Yeah. Well, I think maybe this is reiterating, but I just think we can go really far when we say yes instead of no. So can I tell a story maybe?
yeah, please.
Um, so a few in 2023, my mother was dying of cancer. And so we moved her into my house, into my bedroom. And we did not know, like it ended up being 3 weeks, but we didn't know how quickly she would go. And so it was obviously a very hard time. And my book came out on May 23rd, which is when she was diagnosed. So it was like this very crazy time of like joy and extreme sadness, and then worry and a lot of anxiety over how and when and where and who's going to be there. And just the logistics of death are quite difficult to deal with. And then, so I was under a lot of stress. And then one day, my son, he was 10 at the time, he was crying in his room, hysterical crying. And I asked my husband what's going on, and he said, oh, it's because tomorrow he has two parties to go to, and he has to choose because they're at the same time. So he's crying because he can't go to both. And I just thought, wow, what a world, right? Like that's what you're crying about. And I knew the easiest thing in the world would be to shame him. The easiest thing in the world to be like, don't you understand what's going on here? My mother is about to die, and you're crying over a stupid party because you have too many friends. Like that would have been so easy for me and so like legitimate. The world would have been like, yeah, his suffering doesn't compare to your suffering, and he's a brat, or whatever. But I was just like so steeped into my own ideas about this. So I went into his room and we were in the dark, and I just rubbed his back. And I just didn't say anything. Like, what am I going to say? So I just rubbed his back. And then I started crying because what Unamuno says is that our hearts are like heartstrings. And when one heart starts beating, the other one does too. So when one person starts crying, if we're very sensitive and attuned, we will often start crying, and that's a beautiful thing. That's actually how hearts are meant to work. And if they don't work like that, it's because we've done a lot of things to kind of shut them down. But I started crying, and then he was so shocked, and he turns around and he says, Mommy, why are you crying? And I said, oh, baby, because my mom's dying.
Mm.
And then he just rubbed my back.
Oh.
And we just sat there, him with his 10-year-old sadness, and me with my 44-year-old sadness. And it was all, there's room for all of it. This is the beauty of it. Once you give up on you shouldn't cry, I deserve to cry, you don't deserve to cry. Like once we give up on all of that, we can all cry, we can all have it at the same time. Like we can all be there with each other. And it's not like, I wasn't trying to like make him feel better, but I think I wasn't making him feel worse, right? Like that, this is a big power we have, because when we're shaming others, we make them feel worse. And he wasn't trying to make me feel better. He didn't wipe away my tears or say, oh, it's going to be okay. Like, what do you say? There's nothing to say. So I feel like it's actually easier than we think. We just have to let go of some basic assumptions about either justification for feelings or legitimacy or scarcity of compassion and empathy. Like I think if we can like let loose on some of those ideas, we would just find that we can have better connections with people. And that's tricky because you have to find the person who can be that for you. And I think that's really hard because we're all trained to try to make each other feel better and say no instead of yes. But if we can be that for somebody else, then that can spread. And then other people can be that for other people. And then eventually someone can be that for us. And then we can have a space where we can just cry and no one's trying to wipe away our tears or tell us everything's going to be fine.
Yeah. Thank you. And thank you for sharing that moment with your son. That was really moving. It creates an image in my head and it really stays.
Yeah, there's room for everybody. We just have to realize that. Yeah.
It's not a zero-sum game like capitalism would have taught us.
Yeah.
We can all be crying and there's still enough room for our tears.
Yeah. Yeah, we're just taught we can only take up this much space in the world, right? Like we can only take up this much, and then you're too much, and you're too much, and it's not true. It's just what we've been taught. Yeah.
It's probably because sometimes when some of us were growing up, our parents, and we have this little capacity for us. It's no one's fault. Humans have limited capacity, and it's not all perfect, but
Because they thought sorry to interrupt you.
no, go for it.
Because they were also taught that their job was to make you feel better. So we've all been taught wrong because they have little capacity because they thought they had a burden that they didn't ever have. They never had to make us feel better. That's the point. We don't have to make anyone, I don't think anyone has to make anybody feel better. And I think sometimes we just butcher it when we try because we're speeding them along because we got things to do. So I don't think it's about making you feel better. It's like if we could have just understood that our job was always just to be there. You just have to lay down. I could just fall asleep with my son. I don't have to do anything.
Yeah.
So it's like easier than we think once we let go that we think we're supposed to cheer each other up, which is the capitalist way. Buy them flowers or. So, but you're right. It's no one's at fault because we've just been taught. We've been taught that's love. love is when I make you smile. No. I think
That's
love
why
is
they,
just like allowing someone to be sad.
yeah. Well, first of all, please don't apologize for interrupting because I do that all the time. I'm sorry, it's my excitement. And sometimes you come up with something really brilliant. And I was like, yes. Anyway, and that's why people put a timeline on grief. You have stages, which was taken
Grief
all wrong,
is,
which was a lovely model, but then it got taken so far
yeah,
again. It was meant to be a
grief,
circular thing. But
yeah.
yeah,
Grief is
but
the worst one in terms of people hurting each other because it's where a griever will often get ghosted precisely for this reason because the friend doesn't know what to say and so they disappear. So grievers experience lots of loss at once, oftentimes. And even if it's not loss, it's then pressure. They're either not crying enough or they're crying too much. Like grievers have it some of the worst because it's the most misunderstood. It's just like Megan Devine wrote a beautiful book that I'm quoting in my
yes.
book, but her epigraph is to the people whose lives are the stuff of other people's nightmares.
What's her book called? It's okay to not be okay or something, isn't it?
Yes,
Yeah.
it's okay to not be okay. Grief in a world that doesn't understand. It's genius.
Mm,
She's amazing. She's
yeah.
another one that I would read because it's just people in the same spirit who are saying, no, it's not you, it's the world. It's not you, it's the world. It's the world
Mm,
that's making you feel that way. It's not you, you're not doing it wrong. It's the world that's making you feel like you should be further ahead by now or doing it better, or all the things.
I was very fortunate to have a late therapist who thought a lot like you.
Mm.
But even after 10 years, I still struggle. Because I had him for
That's
10
how
years, but I
powerful
had many
society
more
is. Yeah.
years before him.
and
So,
and around him, right, every hour you just have 1 hour with him, right, a week or whatever, but like around that you have all the forces that are telling you, that are telling all of us that we're doing it
yes.
wrong, that we could be happier, that everyone else is happier, that this is how they did it, there's a secret to life, and all the things that are,
And because, like you said, everything is so from the heart, that fear of anger that you talked about at the very beginning felt really threatening when someone first expressed to you, no, you should be angry with your mother. You know, yeah, but it's complex. Thank
yes,
you.
because in part because they were saying you should only be angry with you know, like, and you're, there's a space for I love you and I'm angry with you and I still love you, right? Like if we, again, I think the theme of this whole day for us is complexity.
Yeah,
Allowing ourselves to be complex and allowing the other person to be complex. They can have mixed
exactly.
emotions, they can have them at the same time. And even if they are angry, if it's this loving anger, they're also trying to do it from this other place. And everyone has their past and everyone has their, the way they were raised and things
Yeah.
that they were not allowed to feel. And so it's just, there's so much grace to go around and there's so much, I don't know, like understanding once we open up to complexity. And individual, there's no one size fits all. People ask me, well, how long should I sit in the dark? And I say, well, it depends who you are.
Yeah.
Depends who you are. It depends on what your experience with the dark is. Some people it's 5 minutes and it's too much for them because they like, you know, can get to a very, very bad place very quickly. But then for other people, they're so unused to it that it's like, oh, a couple hours and you'll be okay. You know, like it's fascinating how we are so trained to come up with like quantitative measures for things. And I think
And
all of it is
binaries and
qualitative.
linears. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, but it really has to do with who you are, what's your experience, what's your comfort, what do you want out of life? Like
It's,
everyone is respectable just the way they are.
yeah. Yeah. Well, lots of it is rooted in the Industrial Revolution and history and Enlightenment, but we won't go there.
Yes. Yes.
But I am coming out with a new book soon as well. And I would
Hey.
love to have that line as a caveat in everything I say, because in that book
Yeah.
I talk about, it's talk about empathy, but actually when you read it, it's a lot about learning how to be angry, how to
Yeah.
healthily blame what needs to be blamed. And
Yeah.
I know it may not get very good reception because of all that we talked about. And I just wish I can have that complexity as a byline on every page. Like, just because I
Yes.
say they did this bad, wrong thing doesn't mean I think they're bad people. Doesn't mean
Yeah.
there's no love. Just because I'm teaching you how to stand up to your bad boss and your abusive mother
Yeah.
doesn't mean they are bad or all bad or there isn't love and respect in there. It's always a mixed bag. And it's such a relief to be able to
Mhm.
say actually all of it.
Yeah, that's why I love books because they give a context. They have to be read whole. It's
Yeah,
very tricky when you just pull a passage or especially pull a line, right? Then you're not getting it. But if you read the whole, they're going to get that message
yeah,
from you. So me and my students sometimes talk about TED Talks, like
yeah.
what are TED Talks, what's good about them, what's harmful about them, like how do they compare to
Oh,
books?
interesting. Yes.
Do they make you go read the book? Like if you're listening to 15 minutes, do you think knowledge is easily acquired? Lots of different philosophical um consequences of things like
Yeah,
TED Talks or
yeah.
shortened versions of things. Yeah.
I tried reading Nietzsche's Why Am I So Wise on the tube. Just open the book. Why am I so clever? And the world is
Yeah.
shit. And they just have that book
Yeah.
cover over my face. But that's the thing. People read that one line
Um,
and not know what
yeah.
it is about. And they
Yeah.
do that a lot of
Yeah.
especially European philosophers. Anyway,
Yes.
I can talk to you
Yes.
forever, but I need to
Yes.
respect your
Yes.
time. And
Thank you so much.
thank you. I love
You're
the
such a good
answer.
host. Thank you.
No, I do interrupt. But thank
No,
you for giving
I
me
just
this.
love your listeners. Like, I love the intense mind. Like, I love that word. I love, like, just like a place where they can feel respected, I think is very, very, very important. And I want to make more places where intense people or sensitive people or, lots of ways we describe them can be redescribed as what is good and valuable about us. Yeah. So
Sure, they've
thank you.
received your love too.
Good, good.
All right. Well, thank you for doing this with me early in the morning. Um, what is this? Zoom allows me to send a heart.
Thank you.
All right. Yeah, we'll stay in touch. I'll be in touch, and please continue to write. I'll still be stalking you on Instagram, so go release things. I'll be
Thank
like that
you.
annoying aunt who likes everything.
It's great. Thank you.
Thank you. All
Okay.
right. Bye
See you
bye.
later.
Have a good
Bye
day. Bye
bye.
bye.